All right. So I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Craig Tucker. I'm a natural resources policy consultant. I work with the Karuk tribe. I work with Sustainable Northwest and a few others. And a lot of what I do, as you guys know, is advocate for Klamath Dam removal. Today, we want to give you an update on where the Klamath Dam removal process is. It's been a long, complicated process that some of us have been working on for decades. Some of us have been working on their entire lives, I think. So we want to let you know where that process is, what to expect going into 2022, familiarize you guys with some of the key spokespeople involved in Klamath Dam removal, and then give you a chance to ask clarifying questions and whatnot. So what I think we'll do is we're going to go around the horn, and I'll introduce our speakers, give them a chance to talk for 3 or 4 minutes about their role in all of this. And then we'll just take some questions from you guys. And I think what I'll just do is ask members of the media to use their hand raise button, and we'll just call on you, and you can direct your question to the appropriate person, or you can just ask us who the appropriate person to answer is. So I think the way we'll do this is give everybody a chance to have their opening statements, and then we'll open it up for questions. And I think that'll make the most sense. I don't think I missed anything there. So I just want to introduce everybody. On my version of Hollywood Squares, I've got Mark Bransom. He is the CEO of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. It's the entity that was created to oversee the surrender application and the decommissioning of the dams. He'll talk about that. We have Glenn Spain. Glenn Spain is on the KRRC board, but Glenn is also the Pacific Northwest Regional Director of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and represents the interests of commercial fishing families. Kelly Delpit is with us. Kelly Delpit is the Klamath Basin Manager for Sustainable Northwest, and she's a second-generation rancher in the Upper Klamath Basin. So she'll share that perspective. In an undisclosed location just outside the Klamath Basin is Amy Cordalis. Amy Cordalis is a fisherwoman. She's a member of the Yurok tribe. She's an attorney for the Yurok tribe, and she's also on the Klamath River Renewal Corporation Board of Directors. And last but certainly not least, Brian Johnson. Brian's the California Director for Trout Unlimited. He's the Vice President of the Board of Klamath River Renewal Corporation. And between all of these folks and myself, we have, I don't know if a century, I don't know, maybe a century of experience, getting close to a century of experience working on Klamath Dam removal. So that's kind of where it is. So I think what we'll do is let Mark Bransom sort of kick us off and talk a little bit about the FERC process, where we are and where we're going. And you'll need to turn your mic on.
All right, Craig, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everybody with us today, taking a little time to join. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'll take just a couple of minutes to brief the group on where we've been, where we are, and where we see things going over the coming months and year or so in the dam removal effort. And I really want to take just a brief moment here to acknowledge all of the decades of good work that Craig referenced are represented here today, and by many others who aren't with us today. Folks have been working really hard on this, and the Renewal Corporation is just honored to sort of stand on the shoulders of this group to be charged with getting dam removal across the finish line, and particularly would like to acknowledge the long efforts of the tribes in that regard. So thank you. So we have seen some significant progress and accomplishments over the last year or so, and we are on the cusp of realizing a number of additional important and significant steps that will ultimately lead, we believe, to dam removal. So this past June, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who is our primary federal regulator, approved our application for the transfer of the hydroelectric dams and the lands and the appurtenant facilities from Pacific Corp, the utility who currently owns and operates them, to the Klamath River Renewal Corporation and the states of California and Oregon. So that's a major regulatory step that was taken by FERC. Shortly thereafter, FERC did announce that they were going to commence work under the National Environmental Policy Act. So they issued a scoping document and they held a series of public scoping meetings for purposes of getting input from public and interested parties as they designed their environmental impact statement. They've indicated to us that we should expect to see a draft of the environmental impact statement sometime in the early part of 2022. And their current schedule has FERC issuing a final EIS sometime in the fall of 2022. And for our purposes, that poses a real significant schedule issue. So we acknowledge that conditions in the basin have been extraordinarily difficult for the many communities that rely on the resources of the Klamath River and the Klamath watershed. And so the Renewal Corporation has been making a real focused effort to keep us on a schedule for the initiation of drawdown of the reservoirs and dam removal beginning in early 2023. And in order for us to accomplish that, we really need to have all of the final permits and authorizations and approvals about no later than late spring or the middle of 2022. As a matter of fact, we have about 6 or 7 months of early enabling construction work that needs to be completed that will facilitate the drawdown of the reservoirs and then ultimately position us for the removal of the dams. So we need to wrap up the final authorizations in the April-May 2022 timeframe if we stand a chance of staying on schedule for 2023. So the Renewal Corporation is doing everything in our power to position us for that schedule. But of course, we do acknowledge that we're reliant on the external forces, including FERC and other regulators, to complete their important work. And NEPA and all of these other analyses are critically important steps that need to be taken. With regard to how the Renewal Corporation is viewing things, we've completed final designs and have put together management plans that reflect what we believe are appropriate mitigation measures. Based on those designs and the mitigation measures, we're within our budget and we have sufficient funding to complete the dam removal and the restoration activities. So bottom line, we hope to get started in the middle of 2022, dam removal in 2023. We're adequately funded. We're raring to go. We're just waiting for these final authorizations to come through. So that's from our perspective, that's where things are today. And we're optimistic that we're going to get there. So Craig, thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for that update, kind of painting the picture of where we are and where we're going here in the next several months. I think we'll kick it over to Amy. Amy, can you talk a little bit about what's going on in the basin right now, why we're having some anxiety about getting this show on the road, and sort of the status of the fishery?
Sure. Well, thank you. And let me start by introducing myself in my native language. Ayakwi, Neknau, Amy, Cordalis, Nuwak, Rekwa, Numetewa, Wak Lao. That was an introduction in my own language from the Yurok tribe. And what I said was I'm pleased to be here, and I thank all of you for being here. And I'm from the village of Rekwa, and it's a good day. So I mean that both in Yurok and in English, and I'm pleased to be here with all of you. So what's happening in the Klamath today and why this is so urgent? So the Klamath River used to be the third largest salmon producing river in the whole lower 48. And it's estimated now that about 1 to 3% of the historic salmon runs are left. And if we don't take drastic measures on the Klamath River throughout the Klamath Basin to change our management practices, to heal the river, to support, ecological, environmental restoration, those salmon will go extinct in our lifetimes. And there's no other way around it. And so dam removal is critical and absolutely necessary to healing the river. Beyond just losing our fish, there's evidence that the entire river is sick. From a Yurok perspective, we see the river as a comprehensive ecosystem, sort of like a human life force. Under Yurok law, the river has personhood rights. So when we talk about the health of the river, we're talking not just about fish, we're talking about its overall, system-wide, ecosystem-wide, body-wide health. And what we're observing is just the continued decline of the health there. For one, everybody knows that we've been in a historic drought, and that is what it is. But what that does is just put additional pressures on the river. A big part of what's happening there is, even in this drought this year, but in the previous 3 to 4 years also, there have been kills of the baby salmon. It's estimated anywhere between 80 to 90% of the out migrating baby salmon over the last 4 years have been killed because they've contracted a disease called C. shasta, which essentially they can't survive. And C. shasta is caused by poor river conditions. It's low water flows, high water temperatures. Also, the riverbed has been changed because of the dams. And essentially what's happened is that, in a free flowing river, there would be sediment that goes down the river, but the dams block that sediment. And so now the bed of the river by the dams is essentially these big boulders. And so these little worms, little polychaete worms, are able to attach to these big boulders, and they then spread these little spores that carry C. shasta to the fish. And so again, we're losing our baby fish over and over and over again. On top of that, we continue to experience toxic blue-green algae blooms every summer. And what's so tragic about that is, come July, August, September, when it's hot and people want to swim and you want to eat your fish, you can't get in the water because it's harmful to health, right? And if you get in the water, you can get sick. And so people have had to stay out of the water. Some of our elders are refusing to eat fish from the river when the toxic blue-green algae are active. My own grandma would refuse to eat fish because she's worried the toxic blue-green algae is going to make her sick also. And then the other thing I'd add is, the Klamath River was operated on what we call minimums, which were, required to basically keep the river on life support. So the river was operated on minimum flows for over, I think we're in day 460 or so. Don't quote me on that, but you can at least say over a year and a half, we've been on minimum flows. And that literally is like, keeping the river on life support. And so the river can't keep operating this way. And dam removal is critical to making the river whole again and restoring it again. One of the things that I always say is, I want my great grandma's river back. She was born pre-dams. She enjoyed a river full of salmon. She lived at the mouth of the river, at the village of Requa, where our family's been from since the beginning of time. And, she, along with all the other ancestors, had a clean, healthy river that provided for them, provided for the family. And that's how Yurok people have existed since the beginning of time. And, there's a few points there. I think one is, we as Yurok people have had this great privilege and honor of being the beneficiary of the lower Klamath River and all of its natural resources. And one of the pillars of our culture is that our interaction with the natural environment, with the Klamath, has to be sustainable. So we never take more than what we need. And in Yurok, we don't use the term sustainable, but we use the term balance, right? So you have a balanced interaction, but the term, balance and sustainability pretty much translates the same into English. So that's how we've interacted, right? And now we're at a place where the river is way out of balance, not because of actions of our own, but because of really the process of colonization and industrialization of the river. And so, it's our job as Yurok people to create these allies, to work with our partners to help rebuild that river, to help bring it back into balance so that all of the creatures of the river can thrive once again, and bring back that balance to the overall system. So that's what we're working towards, and dam removal is critical to that overall process. And really, it can't come soon enough. Mark spoke very eloquently and timely about what our sort of time frame and how we're pushing for 2023, and that's really important in order to save our runs and put this river back together. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much for that perspective. And I think, well, let's flip it. And so Amy is talking a lot about the downriver tribal cultural perspective. Above the dams, there's also a community whose the social fabric of their community also is somehow intertwined with these fish in this water. So Kelly Delpit, can you talk a little bit about your role in all this and the role of the agricultural community upstream?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Craig, and thanks, Amy and Mark, for kicking us off so eloquently. I'm happy to share the ag perspective from my experience as a Basin native and second generation cattle rancher in the Upper Basin. First, I want to start off by saying and clarifying that the 4 dams slated for removal provide no irrigation water. Not a single farm, ranch, or municipality diverts water from the reservoirs behind the dams that are slated for removal. And it's a common misperception, but it just will not negatively affect irrigation supply for ag and Klamath. And a healthy Klamath River, to Amy's point, is really in everyone's interest, including ag. Getting salmon and steelhead off the endangered species listings, improving water quality and the overall health of the river is in the best interest of ag because it reduces the regulatory burdens that ag has to manage around now. If the fishery and water is regulated as it currently is because it's unhealthy, everyone, including ag, suffers. The agricultural community currently bears the burden of poor water quality regulations. Talking to a lot of folks throughout the basin, I won't speak for everybody, but it really does come down to what's good for fish is good for farms, and dam removal is certainly good for fish. With regards to water quality, dam removal won't solve all of our water quality problems, but we hope that taking out these 4 dams will remove perhaps 4 of the most significant impediments to water quality, as well as restore the natural hydrology of the river to the benefit of resident fish, wildlife, and agriculture. Ag is really an integral part of the basin, has been for quite some time. Our goal here with dam removal is to find a balance, recognizing that right now our ecosystem in the Klamath is very much out of balance. We can't continue the status quo, and dam removal is a huge step toward restoring that balance while keeping ag as an integral part of it. So I'll stop there for now, keep it short and sweet, but happy to answer any questions.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. And I'm sure people will have questions for you. I think we'll kick it now out to the ocean. Glenn Spain represents commercial fishing families up and down the West Coast. Glenn, can you take 3 or 4 minutes and talk about how Klamath Dam removal plays into commercial fishing families' livelihoods?
Well, sure. Thank you. As probably most of you know, the salmon, when they hit the river, they hit the estuary, they go north and south. There's a broad area of coast where they intermingle and circulate and grow to size and become harvestable fish to harvest in the ocean. My folks are dependent on that. We're not only water users, we want the water in the river most of the time, but we're also people of the fish as well. And our communities all the way from Monterey south to the Oregon-Washington border, those are sustained in part by harvesting salmon. And of late, we've been under what are called weak stock management constraints. The weakest stock is what constrains the whole fishery in that whole area of 600 miles. And the Klamath are the weakest stock. That's why our fishery is closed this year in all of Northern California. And it was closed last year in all of Northern California. There are not enough fish surviving the gauntlet of disease and poor water quality conditions to be able to come back to have enough to fish. And that costs us hundreds of millions of dollars. It costs our communities their economic survival in a lot of ways, because it constrains us from all harvests, including harvests from the California Central Valley. When those runs are good and the Klamath are poor, we can't catch any of them because they intermingle. That's called weak stock management. It's not only required by law, but it's required by the laws of biology. So that's why the Klamath for us is the whole coast. Everything that happens in the dams and within the reservoirs affects people like us all up and down the coast for 600 miles. And that's why we're looking at doing what is going to be perhaps the most aggressive river restoration program ever in the United States, at least. And that is to bring back into some sort of health what was once the third largest salmon producing river in the continental United States. And by doing that, we benefit the whole community and the coast, but also the river community. We will benefit ag in a variety of ways. We're basically the same kind of people as the farmers. We're family food providers. You know, we have a lot in common, and we actually work with the farming community to try to resolve these problems in the Upper Basin. There is hope that we can do that, but the key is removal of the dams. So I'll leave it at that.
Glenn, thank you so much. And then we're going to let my colleague Brian Johnson with Trout Unlimited kind of back clean up. And maybe, Brian, you can, I don't know if there's anything, everybody covered this really well, and there's things folks left out. But can you talk a little about the perspective of the conservation organizations that's collaborating with farm communities, fishing communities, travel communities to help make dam removal a reality?
Yeah, I can definitely do that, Craig. And I might also just, you know, tick off really briefly some common kind of questions and answers that people have, and as I come into it. So yeah, I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the California director for Trout Unlimited. And I got involved in this back 2005, which, you know, in some circles makes me kind of a newcomer here, you know, working on Klamath, but played a supporting role through the original version of the KHSA and was a lead negotiator for the amendments that we did in 2015, 2016, and represented the board and conservation groups last year as we were working through issues with FERC. And you know, conservation groups, including my organization, which was made up originally of people who like to fish, and then decided that if you take care of the fish, the fishing will take care of itself. I mean, our perspective on, you know, the values for it are similar to what, you know, Amy and Glenn said, and, you know, we're for it for the same reasons, and because of the way that it relates to agriculture and other people in the basin. You know, it can unlock a lot of the possibility that we have in the Klamath, and we, I'll just say, you know, working, you know, for a national organization, you know, I have a lot of things in California that we work on that we value, but I think the opportunity, you know, bang for the buck on Klamath, starting with the dam removal program, is as good as it gets anywhere in the country. So I'm gonna roll through just, you know, briefly a few, you know, kind of common questions and answers and sources of confusion that people have sometimes, you know, reporting around this project. And I'll do it quickly and not ask anybody to, you know, take our word for it here, but I'll note a few of them, and if they come up for you, you know that we can help you find the source document so you can report it accurately. And I'll mention 5. as Kelly noted, these dams are not used for irrigation diversions. They're also not used for any municipality diversions. They're not water supply dams. But you will hear people who maybe in good faith, not knowing something about the project, will say, hey, we've got a water shortage here in California. We have flood risks. Why would you be removing dams? But they're not used for water supply. Number two, in a variation on that, you'll hear people say, well, hey, if we remove those dams, the river will go dry in the summertime. But again, that's also not true. And the dams are not large, and they're not used to store water from the wet part of the season and release water down in the dry part of the season. There is water storage up in Upper Klamath Lake, which is a natural lake that has human-made controls on it to store water and release it. But these hydropower dams are used for hydropower only, and at most could change the timing of the water that's running through a little bit. So in every meaningful sense, the amount of water that you get below the lower dam at Iron Gate is the amount of water that's coming in at the top of the dam above J.C. Boyle, plus the tributary inflow. And for the same reason, the dams, number three, are not meaningful for flood safety. They don't have that kind of storage capacity at most. They weren't built for flood safety and aren't operated that way, and at most could change the timing of flow in a very insignificant way. And the parts of the basin that have flood risk are far down. And by the time we get to flood stage down there, the amount of inflow coming in from all over the basin would, inevitably would totally overwhelm any storage in these dams. They'd be full long ago, and the water would just be, moving through those. Number four, sediment. We'll see things, from folks worrying about the toxic sediment behind the dams. There is sediment behind the dams, but it's not toxic, and it's been, sampled extensively and modeled extensively. I will say that there are definitely likely to be short-term impacts from the construction project on water quality and sediment in the river. And again, that's something that's been extensively studied and modeled, and will be documented again through by FERC through the environmental review process. And we've seen from the Elwha Dam removal project in Washington State and other places that the sediment tends to clean through very quickly, and the amount of sediment relative to the size of the river, there's every reason to expect that that's the way it would work here as well. And the last one I'll mention is a little bit more trends toward thank you, Craig, for the documentation there. The last one I'll mention trends a little bit more toward the conspiracy minded. And this being America in 2021, there are some conspiracy theories, which is that fish never made it above these dams and don't go up through Upper Klamath Lake. And the most recent version of this is that there's a lava flow that blocked the passage. And as far as we can tell, this is a misreading of some actual geology that 150,000 years ago or so, there was a lava flow that temporarily impounded a lake until the river cut its way back down again a couple thousand years later. And I know I'm out of time, but I will just say on this one, it's been hot lately. There's a person who calls himself an amateur naturalist who has this out there, and it's, to editorialize a little bit, it's maybe somewhere between amusing and offensive that a amateur naturalist would think that they have uncovered something that the native people living in a basin for thousands of years wouldn't have known every way from Sunday. But if you need other types of documentation, photos, newspaper articles, peer-reviewed science, radiocarbon dating of fish bones from 7,000-year-old fish camps in the upper basin, we have those too. And I'll I'll wrap up. But again, none of these are things where, we would expect you to just take our word for it. But if you hear these, we can help you uncover the sources, and people will handle it different ways. Sometimes we see reporters come into the basin and start by covering the controversy, and he said, she said, and then come to decide that folks can just report what the facts are, and we'll leave that to you and trust you to do it. But we can help you with the citations.
Brian, thank you so much for all that, for going through that list. I think what we want to do is give folks an opportunity to ask questions. You have a pretty distinguished, amazing panel here representing different kinds of communities and different kinds of interests in the Klamath. So we just want to take a moment to see if you guys have some questions for anybody here now that you have them at your disposal. I can always start I always have questions. All right, I'll ask a question. So we've been working at this for 20 years. We do anticipate that in 2023, we'll be able to start decommissioning. How certain are we here at this last leg of the process? How do you describe our level of confidence that we'll successfully navigate these last few hurdles with FERC and the regulatory agencies? Somebody like to tackle that?
Let me try to tackle that if I could.
Okay.
Of course, there's a long process, a lot of permits, a lot of work that needs to be done, but we're 95% through all of that and past those various barriers with flying colors. We have state permits from the 401 certification permits from both states. We have had three prior rounds, and this is the fourth round of NEPA environmental impacts analysis. Each state did one for their permits, but also there was one in 2012 around the original plan, which was a little more extensive, but it's, and that was triple peer reviewed as well. So we have all of this massive record that says that dam removal is not only possible, but a good move for the ratepayers, a good move for the company. Won't have any major impacts that can't be mitigated. It will have impacts, and there are mitigations for all of those impacts available. So I would say that we're in the tail end. Nothing is certain, but we're very confident that we have a huge record and that we've done actually way above and beyond industry standards in terms of engineering studies, in terms of assurances that we won't have budget overruns. All of this is there on the table. And I think that is impressed FERC to some large degree.
We have a question from Dan Bacher, who's a longtime reporter covering this issue. As long as I've worked on it, I think, Dan, you've been working on covering this issue. He's asking, what's the role of Iron Gate Hatchery in the future, and what will the impacts on fishing and fish during the construction process be? So who wants to talk? Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about Iron Gate Hatchery and how it's being handled in the plan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it from the perspective of KRC's responsibility, and there are other experts who may also like to augment my response, Craig. Thank you. So because the Iron Gate Hatchery is a baseline mitigation for the construction of Iron Gate Dam, KRC has assumed the responsibility to ensure that there is an alternative hatchery plan implemented. So before the reservoirs are drawn down and the water supply, which supplies the good cold water to the Iron Gate Hatchery is no longer there, we have to implement some alternative production facilities. And in close consultation with all of the parties, including the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have developed a hatchery transition plan that will provide for some at least temporary production facilities. So primarily we are looking at the construction of some temporary facilities at the old Fall Creek Hatchery. And the department is considering some additional production facilities elsewhere, and these will be dependent on water quality conditions and water flow conditions that will ensure that we have sufficient capacity to meet the production goals that are required. So the utility that currently owns and operates the dams is required to provide funding for up to 8 years of hatchery operation and maintenance. And beyond that, it really is a decision that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife will make in consultation with their stakeholders. But from the perspective of the KRRC, we will ensure that there are facilities ready to go. And I'll let others talk about some of the longer term issues.
Amy, do
Talk
you
about
want
some of the, let me talk about some of the impacts on the fishery that dam removal itself will have. We do know that there is sediment, and there will be a sediment plume for a short period of time, roughly 2 years. Most people don't understand how much sediment that a normal river under normal conditions moves. It's in the millions of cubic yards. So we're not really talking about more than 2 years, but we are also timing dam removal to take advantage of the wettest part of the season. That's why we're timing it to start really the physical removal parts in January, February. That takes advantage of the freshets, the rainfall, to move the sediment out as quickly as possible. So yes, there will be impacts on fish, but the fish are mostly not there during that time of the year. They're mostly out to sea. And the juveniles are gone, and the adults are not yet in. So we're doing everything we can to mitigate and minimize the impact on fish of that removal process. But there will be some impacts, and it will be important for us to maintain the hatcheries for a period of time to make sure that we offset those impacts. But ultimately, everyone is predicting that the fish will come and colonize areas that they historically lived in for thousands of years. And once they have access to that, they will recolonize pretty quickly.
I think we'll move on beyond hatcheries, but maybe this will be a good question for Amy. You've been working on this. Maddie from Oatman from Mother John's is asking, what are the main forces threatening to delay or prevent dam removal right now? It's a good question.
Thanks, Craig. While I have the floor, I can't help but provide a little bit of a response to the hatchery question. One thing I wanted to note is, so, the Yurok tribe is the largest California tribe. Our reservation straddles the lower 45 miles of the Klamath River, a mile on either side. And we are the largest harvester of salmon in the Klamath, in the estuary. So the tribe operates a commercial fishery. That's a part of the fishery that I participate in. Of course, we have our ceremonial and our subsistence fishery as well. And so, and in addition to all of that, the tribe has a very robust fisheries department, which actually employs the second highest amount of fishery biologists in the whole state of California, second to only the state of California. And we both manage our fishery in terms of restoration, try to manage the river, but also manage our own harvest to, excuse me, maximize the wild fish. We are working toward restoring, the wild salmon runs. We evolved with those salmon. And we kind of joke now that since we've been, interacting with one another since the beginning of the time, those fish have our DNA and we have those fish DNA. And there's a real opportunity here on the Klamath with dam removal to really support these wild runs and build them back. And that's what Yurok is working on. So I guess moving on from that, what is the biggest threat to dam removal right now? I would just say it's not necessarily a threat. It's just a timing issue of, as Mark articulated earlier, the current, FERC NEPA scoping timeline would result in another year delay. And so, we're working with FERC to try to expedite things so that we can stay on track for 2023, removal. we're hopeful. We, you know, the tribe specifically is in regular consultation with FERC. We're sort of working through all these different issues. And so, you know, I think that just goes to speak to how close we are on this project. And that's also a big reason why, you know, we wanted to have this event with the media right now, is because we are really getting close. And it's sort of like that final push, you know, the sprint at the end of a run, that little kick. And that's it. Like, our contractors are ready to go. You know, the permits are coming in line. So it is time. And it's time for these dams to be removed.
Another thing I would just add to speak to Maddie's point is, you never know when someone's going to litigate the block project. And I think one of the things on Klamath is we have always gone above and beyond the basic legal requirements for the science, the research, the justification, really every step of the way. So we think our technical record on Klamath justifying dam removal is phenomenally robust. It may be one of the largest FERC dockets in the history of FERC. It's last time we had the triple peer review, which included a review for the National Academy of Sciences. It was something like 6,000 pages of technical information. So you never can tell who's going to come out of the woodworks to try to sue and block a project, but we've anticipated that, and we think we have something that's defensible in every way, shape, and form, including defensible in a courtroom if it ever came to that. Anyone else have any pressing questions we can touch on? I don't. Let's see. Liam Moriarty. Liam is with Jefferson Public Radio. He's asking Glenn, he said the plan calls for dams to be removed when water flows are highest to have minimal impact on fish. Water flows in recent years have been dangerously low. Is there any reason to think future flows will be adequate to flush the sediment according to plan? Good question. You're muted, Glenn. You have to turn off. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I should know that by now. We're always at the mercy of hydrology, but that is the best time of the year to do it. And although we may have less rain, we still have a fair bit of rain. And this upcoming year will hopefully not break any records in terms of drought, but we're prepared for that as well. The timing is the same. In other words, you do what you can to time dam removal so that the sediment goes out as quickly as possible during a very short period of time. That window is the time where the fish are not present. It's not entirely dependent on hydrology. If we have more rain, it happens faster, but it will happen nonetheless.
Well, and I would add those times of year are not only because you'd have flows to move sediment, but those are also the times of year where there's less action going on in the main stem vis-a-vis fish spawning and rearing.
Right. They're mostly not there during that period of time. They're out to sea or
in the tributary.
Or the coho, they're way up in the top of the tributaries.
Yeah. Okay. So anything else folks would like to ask? Give me a second. Is there anything, would anybody like to bring it all home, so to speak, and sort of have a little bit of a closing statement, and then we'll let everybody start their weekend a couple of minutes early. Does anybody want to bring it home for us? I'll bring it home for us. Amy, I see Amy was thinking. Amy, would you like to bring it home for us?
All right, since I'm from the mouth of the river, I'll bring us all home. Well, first I want to thank everybody for their time and interest in this project, and I encourage everybody, you know, the reporters on the call, to follow up with the folks that you see here. I think one of the biggest points about this particular project is that we on the Klamath are setting a model for how we can revise our natural resource management practices in a way that helps us, well, how do I say this? Helps us become more climate resistant, helps us get over, climate crisis. One of the things that I have felt very passionate about in this particular project is what we've been able to do on the Klamath through the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, through subsequent MOUs that have kept us together as a coalition, is equally place business, state interest, tribal interest, environmental interest, NGOs on an even playing field, and get to a place where we can equally value each other's lifeways and needs, and think about the future, and think about how we can, as humans with different divergent interests, interact with the natural environment in a way that is sustainable. Removing these dams, taking out what the company calls legacy assets, that don't provide any kind of water supply or very minimal power, no flood control, yet are destroying a river and tribal communities. Removing them makes sense, right? Dam removal, it isn't going to make sense in every place, but here it does. And so this is the best use of sort of the nation's resources, and we're doing it in a way that is, diverse and inclusive of different interests. And so I just think that this project is such a good model for how we can sort of get ourselves out of this climate crisis while embracing, diversity and inclusion and respecting a lot of different types of lifeways. So I encourage you all to check out reconnect klamath.org and stay in touch with all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who took time out this afternoon to join us. I thank Mark Bransom, I thank Brian Johnson, Kelly Delpit, Glenn Spain, and Amy Cordalis for joining us. I want to thank behind the scenes, we have Nina Ehrlich Williams, who's helping us with public relations work and outreach. Thank you, Nina, so much. And we do have lots of other partners: International Rivers Network, American Rivers, California Trout, Save California Salmon, Native Fish Society. There's a whole host of dozens and dozens of organizations collaborating on this. And Nina and I are happy to help you find folks, all those organizations, to tell this story from their perspective. Please call us anytime. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.